What's going on YouTube? It's October 19th, 2020. It's about 12:02 a.m. right now, so I'm a little late in doing this, but it's basically just this is just basically a vlog of me giving my thoughts on Malcolm X. You know what I'm saying? More so like his book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley. So I kind of like want to go through the book and then after that give my assessment. And I wrote something years ago called not metaphysical, but the analysis of the mind of Malcolm X, and I pretty much did the same thing. I basically broke down what I gathered from the book and then gave my thoughts on what I think about him, but in particular, his mind. It's called Metaphysical Addendum. I wrote it, published it in my notes section on Facebook like 2015. You know, kind of like a part of the documentation process. So I always wanted to do like a video kind of going over it. So it's kind of like kilter to do it now. So like for the past few days or maybe a week at the most, I kind of like, I wanted to kind of go over the book again and, take notes on certain things that I may have forgotten or maybe something that I missed and didn't perceive to be important at the time. So I went ahead and did it again. And this time, instead of just actually reading the book, because I pretty much know the whole fucking book, I just went ahead and listened to the audio. You know what I mean? The audio version, because it's quicker. Even though they left a few things out, but I pretty much got a good look, re-look at it or whatnot. Now, before going into the book and, explaining it, breaking it down or whatnot, I want to talk about like how I first came about Malcolm. Not even came across him, but what made me start paying a little bit more attention to him. I always knew about him because first off, I was born in Chicago, on the west side of Chicago, and we lived out there up until 6th grade. The neighborhood and the school that I went to was majority black, you know what I mean? Just to put it simple. So we were very familiar, you know what I'm saying, with the civil rights movement, of course, every single year, not just Black History Month, but especially Black History Month. They would have functions and we would all participate in different classrooms, go to the auditoriums, do skits or read poetry, all kind of stuff. So, of course, I knew who Malcolm was. Definitely knew who Martin Luther King was. Moved away to the suburbs after that. Okay, that's cool. I want to say around the time I graduated from high school, which was 2004. Like I said, I knew about Malcolm X, of course. I seen the movie and all of that. You know what I mean? I knew about, what he stood for or what he represented. But it's like, by the time I about around 2004, I was actually right before I graduated, I was reading this book about Huey P. Newton. It's really about the Black Panther Party or whatnot. So, Malcolm came up in that book, of course, a lot because they are a legacy pretty much of Malcolm X, at least back in the day when they existed. So I started looking at different speeches to this and that. I'm paying a little bit more attention to them. And I remember around the time when I was, trying to register to go to college or whatnot, I was listening to his speeches and then his debates and stuff. And I never forget, I was, I thought somebody was at the door. I was extremely impressed. You know what I mean? Like, I remember the first one that really took my breath. It was a debate. This happened in 1962. It was between Malcolm X and Bayard Rustin, right? Now, as far as, like I say, his perspective, I was familiar with, but just going into a little bit more details about it, and, it was how keen, his perspective that he argued for was simplistic, keen, and sharp at the same time. But not even just that, like on an intellectual basis. It made a lot of practical sense to me at the same time. So I remember I'm sitting at the computer, I'm listening to Bayard Rustin. I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, woo. And then Malcolm X got up there and spoke, and it was just the light bulb clicked in my head. You know what I mean? So I started reading about him even more. And then, ironically, there was a counselor. Well, she wasn't a counselor, but she worked in the counselor's office. I think her name was Amika. She was a Christian or whatnot, but we sparked the conversation. And this is, like I said, during the time, and I was like, man, I like this guy Malcolm right here. He I'm feeling him. So we used to go back and forth. And then one day, she was giving me a ride back or whatnot. Make a long story short, we stopped there somewhere called J and J Fish on Lake Street in Aurora, Illinois, and there was two guys there, and they were selling newspapers, and both of them were of the Nation of Islam. They were selling the Final Call newspaper, right? So me and him got to talking because, I was interested. I'm like, oh, okay, this is, so I get to talk to him. And, of course, I bring up Malcolm X, and we started talking for a while. Then we exchanged numbers or whatnot. And that's how I met that guy from that day. Now, I'm going to put this on YouTube, so I'm not really going to say his name. I shouldn't have said old girl name. Make a long story short, that's how we developed the relationship. And every Sunday, because he was enlisted, he was a registered member. He wasn't like somebody that would just visit. Here's something like kind of like me. He wasn't kind of like me. You know what I'm saying? He was registered or whatnot. He was officially a part of the Fruit of Islam. But he was cool though. So every Sunday, he'll take me out there to their west side, the location on the west side of Chicago, or whatnot. And then I started going out there and I listened. I appreciated what they were teaching as well. You know what I'm saying? So then eventually I ended up seeing Minister Farrakhan speak quite a few times. I think I bought a total, maybe 2 or 3 of their books, or whatnot. Yeah, I think about 3 books. I went to quite a few functions. That was a long time ago, right back in the day. So that's how, that was really my introduction to Malcolm X. Now, I don't want to go too far off. I'm going to say the rest until the end of this. I'm just going to go through the book, and I'm going to try to make it as brief as I can. So basically, in the beginning of the book, they start off talking about Malcolm X's father and his mother. His father, Earl, I believe his name was Earl Little. Hopefully I'm not saying his name incorrect. And then his mother. And how one night they ended up getting attacked by the Klan. At this point they lived in Omaha, Nebraska. She was pregnant with Malcolm or whatnot. And during that time as well, his father was already preaching the philosophies of Marcus Garvey at the time. He was a Baptist minister, but he incorporated those philosophies. So it caused a lot of trouble with certain races, the Klan or whatnot. And so his mother and them got attacked that night. Actually, they were threatened to leave or whatnot. Eventually, because of this trouble, they ended up going somewhere else, but not out of fear, because based on the book, they were saying, like, Malcolm's father, he was like, even though this is back then during that context when a person would really feel the brunt of racism, they were saying like he was a strong, stern man and physically capable as well. He was 6'4", extremely dark. I think he had one eye or whatnot, but he also had a rough upbringing too, which also informed his belief system, because he had like a total about 5 brothers. No, he had a total of 4 brothers, and 3 of them ended up getting killed by white folks, and one of them was lynched for sure. Of course, he himself ended up joining the occasion, so out of all 5 of them, 4 of them got killed by white people, basically, you know what I'm saying? But as far as like his experiences and his brothers getting killed, it also added to his perspective as well. So he wasn't necessarily like timid in that aspect, but they ended up moving. And then that's when they moved to Langston, Michigan or whatnot. Same thing occurred there. And it was a group, I think they were called the Black Knights, or they were called something, but basically still just a racist group who also harassed them as well, things like that. And then like one night they set a fire or whatever outside of Malcolm X's house. His father responded. I believe he shot at them as well. They left. Police was called. A little investigation happened. It really didn't stop the harassment that they were going through or whatnot. So anyway, as far as like, the routine within Malcolm's household, like I say, he said his father, even though he a preacher, would also get paid for speaking engagements and things like that. And he had a decent little following. Sometimes he'd fill up a room with like 20 people or whatnot. And also that Malcolm, as a youngin, noticed the difference as far as like the core inner circle that really followed his father. He noticed the difference as opposed to like how they would act outside of that circle. Basically, he seen like more genuineness from those people. So basically, he had a nice little follower of folk that was real. That's what he was saying. But anyway, as far as his mother, his father wasn't necessarily an angel. He did beat on her, and a lot of times it'll be because of the arguments that they'll get into. Like he was saying, his mother was mixed, and even though she hated the blood in her, which is partly why he believes that she chose his father or whatnot, but she hated the blood in her because her mother, basically herself, like she was a product of rape, basically. So she didn't really know who her father was in the first place. But because she was mixed, you know what I'm saying, she had straight hair and she had a certain way of speaking or whatnot. So like, and along with education, along with that, as Malcolm mentioned in the book. So when her father would make a mistake, she'll correct him. It'll kind of get to his ego. Then that'll turn into a little physical altercation or whatnot. So he did whoop on her. One day, I think they was preparing dinner. Well, they was getting ready to prepare food. You know, he grabbed the chicken and ripped his head off or whatnot, and then threw it on the ground or whatever. And Malcolm said he was kind of like in a bad mood, but he was leaving for whatever reason. And his mother had a funny feeling that something bad was going to happen. Like in the book, he was saying, like they, as far as him and his mother, he believed that they were blessed with some type of intuition. Like whenever she felt something bad was going to occur, it always did. And then the same thing played out with him in his life. So that particular day, she had like a bad little sense of something. So when Malcolm's father was walking up the road, she tried to call him back, and you know, surprisingly, he just kind of like waved his hand at her. He like, you know, in a sort of like in a good gesture way, you know what I mean? Because she was saying she was surprised because at first he was in a bad mood. So obviously he wasn't like, he didn't wave his hand like, gone somewhere, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, he left. Come to find out, that particular night, that's when he got killed. They found out about it the next morning. As far as like the act itself, you know, I guess he got jumped by some white people. It's a white man. It said one side of his head was crushed and his body was basically split in half. He was left on top of some tracks, so he got ran over or whatnot. And the next day when they came to get his mother, you know, she was frantic or whatnot. They took her to the hospital and she viewed the body. You know, after that, she sort of went crazy because they didn't really have somebody to fend for them in the home. So authorities got involved. By this time, Malcolm had like a little buddy that he'll hang with. Because as far as like his brothers and sisters, he had quite a few of them. It was Malcolm, Wilfred, Hilder, Filbert, Reginald, Yvonne. They don't mention Yvonne too much in the book, by the way. And I think Robert. He had 3 other siblings too, but they were like considered half siblings. As far as one that they mentioned quite often in the book, her name was Ella. She lived in Boston or whatnot. But anyway, as far as like during this period when this happened, when his father got killed, around this time Malcolm was he had a little buddy that he'll hang with or whatnot. So like when the state authorities got involved and they decided to split up the family, that particular family, I can't call their name right now, but Malcolm ended up living with them. The house that they stayed in at the time, it was like a 4-room house. His older brother Wilford and not Reginald, Hilder, his brother Wilford or Wilfred and Hilder were allowed to stay there in that house and live there because they were old enough. And Wesley and Reginald went to live with somebody else, but not too far from the town itself. Same thing with Malcolm. So he was saying like when they finally got split up, you know, they still maintained a good amount of contact within each other's or whatever. But, you know, after that, he started going into details about the school that he was going to. Because before that, he was also getting in trouble because he was stealing. You know what I'm saying? Because, like I say, they didn't have their father around. So, you know, the economics, goddamn it, of their family was slowed down greatly. It was another dude that did come around, as the book mentions, a dark-skinned fellow who was talking to his mom for a little short period, but then eventually that just stopped. So as far as his mother, she went crazy. She got placed in the home. As far as where Malcolm was living at, in school, of course, he faced racism. Uh, as far as like him, one day he was talking about like what they wanted to be when they grew up, and he said a lawyer or something like that, and the teacher was telling him it was not a realistic goal, especially during a time period. So he suggested a profession that he basically suggested a profession that was a little more relegating. You know what I'm saying? And that was like a part of Malcolm's experience growing up. That's like a memory that he kept with him. So one day, in order to get the teacher back, he put like a tack on a chair, and the guy ended up sitting on the chair. Malcolm got expelled for that. Big long story short, that's when he went to, I think, was it a reform school or something like that? But he ended up getting transferred somewhere else, as far as like school was concerned, a boarding school or something like that. And he did pretty good, and then he actually graduated and all that. When he graduated in 8th grade, that's when he moved away to Boston, all the way further to the East Coast, to his half-sister's Ella's house. And based on the book, Ella was kind of like a sharp lady, like she was, the way that she'll present herself and carry herself, as well as taking care of her business. So like that practicality factor that Malcolm had about him, that I take from his book, and what I know about him outside the book as well, that was something that she possessed as well. So that's something that he gravitated toward. Basically, they had a pretty good relationship throughout the entire of the book. You know what I'm saying? In fact, she was the one that gave him money to go to Mecca, but I get to that part in a second. But anyway, that's when he moved out there to Boston. Now, Ella, the neighborhood that she lived in out there, Roxbury or something like that, on the hill, something like that. But it was like I ain't gonna say uppity, but a relatively good neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? Like as far as like a class is concerned, because there were a lot of black professionals that lived in that neighborhood as well. And she also encouraged Malcolm to go on, discover the town, basically venture out, see what's out there or whatnot, not to just stay in the house and not do nothing. But the weird thing is, like, when he did that, instead of him, being completely awed by just the neighborhood and the type of people that were around, he was more attracted to the nightlife of Boston, so he started hanging more so in that direction. And he started catching on to the people and the lingo, and he was like, like when he'll walk around, he was attracted to, not, I guess you could just say hustlers, but just regular folk or whatnot. As far as people at the bars, the pool halls, or the restaurants on the corner. That flashy glamour presentation that he liked, but not just that. He liked like the smoothness of some of the guys. You know what I'm saying? He thought that they was cool. Like it was a guy named Shorty. That Malcolm, like one of the bars that he'll walk past, he'll see this guy Shorty playing pool, and he'll pay attention to his body language. But he also liked how slick his hair was, because he had a conch or whatnot. So that was one of the people that caught Malcolm's eye, even though Shorty was like 10 years older than him. So Malcolm's still around like 14 at this time. 14, going on 15 at this time. So one day, he decided to going to the bar. Before that, actually, yeah, as far as like what he noticed about this whole different lifestyle having, he basically had like a culture shock, but in the good sense. You know what I'm saying? As far as like children, he noticed that they were a lot faster as well. Like the age range that he mentioned, he said 10 to 12 years old. They'll be sitting there gambling and playing cards, and then like how like grown people gambling or whatnot, they act like the children would turn to a adult and then ask them for a penny or a nickel or something on the game that they'll be playing right there in the moment within themselves, and then everybody will be cool with that. So that right there really, made Malcolm gravitate more so toward that lifestyle as well. You know what I'm saying? He wanted to get loose. So, as far as this guy Shorty, Malcolm kind of gathered he had got a good idea of how approachable and personable that this guy was as well. Because one day he was just standing outside of one of these bars, particularly the one that he seen Shorty in. He said he was just standing there and he had on red. And the guy came out and the guy seen him. As far as Shorty, Shorty came out, seen him, and was like, "Hi, Red." Just kind of like joking or whatever. So Malcolm, took it and read it immediately and said, "Okay, this is a nice guy." So on this one particular day when he decided to get a little bit more brave, he walked up into the bar. He snuck all the way to where Shorty was at. They ended up having a conversation, and one of the things that Malcolm used to help spark the conversation was, I'm looking for a job or whatever. Of course, Shorty spoke back to him, speaking this regular lingo that he was accustomed to. And in the midst of doing that, Shorty found a little bit more about Malcolm X, where he came from, because coincidentally, Shorty was also from Langston, Michigan as well. And then, Malcolm started bringing up names. Shorty knew who these people were, blah, blah, blah. So after that, Shorty was trying to give him the game on how he got to carry himself, how you can come up and this and that, da-da-da. Eventually, Malcolm X did find a job shining shoes at a place called a Roseland Ballroom. There he met a lot of famous musicians. Some of the names I can't call right now. I know one guy named Basie or something like that. But he met a lot of them through shining their shoes. But he also eventually delved in a little bit of hustling. White men, for instance, that would come in, and Malcolm would be like a facilitator, for them to get black whores or whatnot. So that was him dipping his toe in the hustling game or whatnot. Let me see. They did also mention in the book, it was brief, that, and it could have been in Boston. I think it was in Boston. It could have been at this place, because I don't think it was at Small's Paradise, if I can remember, that Malcolm X also met, aside from these musicians, he also, crossed paths with Red Fox as well. But anyway, let me see. That's that. Developed a relationship with Shorty. Eventually, he, at the age of 16, that's when he gained a little bit more status or whatnot. Because one of the things that he also noticed when he first went to Boston was the fact that, aside from people being able to relatively be a little bit more free as black folks, a little bit more spunk in certain contexts, he also noticed that, it was not too much of a taboo to see a white female walking down the street with a black guy at night, by the way. So that was something that he, caught as well. So by the time I think he became 16 years old, that's when he met this white chick named Sophia, which is also, she's shown in the movie too. He did meet a female named Sophia. That was his girlfriend. They gained him a little bit more status as well. And then he also had a job that his sister hooked him up with on the train. Now, I think this job was right after, it could have been just before Sophia or right after Sophia, but it's pretty much around the same time. His sister Ella hooked him up with a job selling sandwiches or something like that. I think selling sandwiches on the train, but the train will run from Boston to, New York or whatnot. And that's how he discovered Harlem, based on a book, being on this train. And what he noticed about Harlem was pretty much the same type of phenomenon, but a little bit more faster and a little bit more flashy and a little bit more attractive. And then, in fact, he had like a technical word for it. He called it techno, techno color bazaar or some shit like that. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, sound like you're trying to say, like, I want to say like the melting pot example, but exclude non-blacks. It was kind of like a black melting pot within itself in Harlem. You know what I'm saying? That's how he kind of compared it to Boston. So eventually, he started delving into things in Harlem as well. Because actually, as far as going back to Boston, he met West Indian Archie in Boston as well. I forgot to mention that. He met him. No. Actually, he met West Indian Archie at Small's Paradise. I think that was in Harlem. Yeah, that was the job that was in Harlem, I believe. That's where he met that guy at. Because he'll come up in there. Actually, yeah, not just him, but a whole bunch of hustlers. It was like a main spot for for what they call the most abled hustlers, and West Indian Archie was one of those people. So it was nice to him, but based on the book, he was saying they could tell he was still kind of green or whatnot. So they kind of would rag on him, make a little fun of his clothes or whatnot. One day, West Indian Archie kind of, he took he took out a measuring tape. He took out a measuring tape, and then he started measuring Malcolm X's clothes. My cigarette went out. I'm finna keep talking while I walk back up here and grab me one. Another one. It's real life. So he measured his clothes and whatnot. Then the very next day, inside the bar, someone had, I think a bartender handed Malcolm X a package, and it turned out that it was a blue suit. And the book, they were saying like the person that purchased basically West Indian Archie bought him the suit. You know what I'm saying? They were saying like it was a guy that was the head of the 40 Thieves gang, and they were boosters and this. Basically West Indian Archie, he bought him the suit or whatnot. So he became more ingratiating with people of that of that ilk or whatnot. There was another guy named Sammy the Pimp that he met that he became cool with as well. Eventually, he started selling weed for him, and then he ended up getting his own connect. You know what I'm saying? So he still was doing business with other people as well. As far as like Sophia, Shorty, they all began to, they kind of go out there search for like rich homes or whatnot in certain neighborhoods and study the home and the time and when the people would be there and when they wouldn't be there. And when they would not, they'll decide to rob them. Eventually, they ended up getting caught doing that. And I think the police ended up going back to Malcolm's spot along with Sophia, and they found Malcolm. They went back to Malcolm's home, and then they found a whole bunch of stolen items as well as tools used to pick locks and this type of stuff. So they all ended up. So Malcolm and all his co-operants ended up getting charged. Sophia didn't get as much time, but again, going back to the book, Malcolm X believed that he got a lot of time, mostly because he was associated with that white girl and she came from a decent background or whatnot. And then actually within the process of him being charged and going through court, it was another person, I forget who he was, but he basically it was a white guy that said something to him that pretty much validated the concern that Malcolm had. Like, yes, they were being discriminated against, even though they were wrong, but given extra time just because of these white women that they were associated with. So Malcolm X ended up going to prison from that. After that, he was in prison for like 7 years. Now, this is where it gets interesting to me. When I first read the book, this part touched me because I had seen the movie so many times. You know what I mean? I could like explain the whole movie. I could write a fucking essay about the movie on the spot. I did not know that it didn't, I didn't know until I read the book, of course, that this guy, Bimby, who was a fellow inmate, was the very first person to really spark Malcolm X's intellect. Now, before I go a little further than that, because I'm trying to keep this in chronological order, later on in the book, he does mention how, he always kind of had like a knack for debates and things like that. Actually, later, toward the end of the book, he mentioned these things. That's something I want to touch on too, but I'm going to wait till I go through the whole book. I don't want to, like I said, I'm trying to get the chronological aspect out of the way. But as far as like the person that really, really sparked his intellect as an adult, definitely, it was Bimby. He noticed that Bimby, even though he was an inmate, he had like a different type of aura about himself. You know what I'm saying? He also had kind of like a different presentation about himself as well. And it was also measured by how he spoke. Like Malcolm was saying, like he was one of those very rare guys he came across that didn't speak a street lingo. Hold on. That he had like a sort of command for the English language, and he was well versed in many different subjects, including religion, because at this point, Malcolm, whenever religion would get mentioned to Malcolm, he would be other than ethical when discussing the subject. You know what I'm saying? Like he'll curse it, and to the point where some people will refer to him as Satan. You know what I'm saying? Actually, he was referred to Satan on the street as well, so that's also something that carried on. But religion was something that he'll definitely curse at. But when this guy Bimby, according to the book, brought up religion, he'll exercise such a command when explaining it, especially the atheist framework, that Malcolm was almost involuntarily drawn to listen almost. You know what I'm saying? Like the guy made so much sense to him, and then like other people, as far as like the other inmates, there like a cipher would form where people would just stand around and listen to this guy talk, and the things that this guy Bimby would say on various subjects would be so captivating that even the guards, he said that even the white guards would stand around and listen. So and then one day Bimby gave Malcolm a compliment, telling him that he felt like he had a brain that he probably should use and this and that. So that's when Malcolm started reading from that point as well. Probably not as obviously not actually as avid as he did in his later years, but from that moment, as far as like his mind being sparked in his adult years, you can trace it all the way back to Bimby. So pretty much he stayed in that prison for about 2 years. Now his sisters and his brothers and them, they wrote letters to him, and like I say, whenever they bring up religion, a curse at him or whatnot. So let me see, 2 years later, in 1948, he was finally transferred to the Concord State Facility in Boston, Massachusetts. So he was closer to his sister. Now, as far as like this facility, based on what they were saying in the book, it was a much easygoing facility. It had about